Great. Well, welcome everybody for the second lecture of the year. Delighted to welcome back Steve Kershaw, who some of you will remember talking about Salamis last year. I wasn't around for that talk, so I'm looking forward to this very much. I reviewed one of Steve's books many years ago. We then got in contact with each other, and hence, I suppose, the reason you invited Salamis, Steve. And that was the 3 battles that saved democracy.
It was indeed.
There were, of course, Marathon, Thermopylae, and Salamis. So we're sort of going back to front, as it were. We've had Thermopylae from Paul Cartledge. We've also had Salamis, as you know, so those of you who were here last year. So tonight we're going to have the Battle of Marathon. Looking forward to this very much. Steve Kershaw, take it away.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a delight. Yeah, thank you for re-inviting me, and to go back in time to this extraordinary thing. It was early in the year 490 BC that the adult male native free citizens of the newly democratic city of Athens, just invented democracy pretty much, went to do something utterly extraordinary. And that was, they went to the polls to elect next year's military officers and civilian magistrates. Here are a bunch of Athenians voting with little pebbles in the British Museum. And this voting and this election was an absolutely enormous deal. Hardly anyone anywhere else in the ancient world went to the polls at all. And the outcome of this election is sometimes felt to have had an enormous influence, determining the entire history in some ways of the Western world. And the Athenians knew that it was important because their city was under threat from the might of the Persian Empire of King Darius I. His tomb is over there on the left of the image. He has many names in many languages, but the Greeks call him Darius. And he's a mighty king. And there's this wonderful vase which is in the Naples Archaeological Museum there. And the decoration on it here vividly illustrates what his intentions are. He's kind of down in the middle here, and if we go close in, on the top level, you've got various sort of divine influences here, including Athena, who is leading personified Greece towards Zeus, and you've got a figure called Apate, who is deceit, and she is as I say, personification of deception, and she's trying to move a personified figure of Asia away from an altar down at this side. There's things going on in the divine level. And as you come down, enthroned in the centre, here is your man, Darius. It says it is, he's labelled. So Darius the king there is there in all his majesty. He calls himself, it's wonderful, I am Darius, the great king, king of kings, king in Persia, king of many peoples, etc., etc., etc. We don't do shyness if we're Darius. And he here is interacting with a man who's standing on a platform, you just see it down here, on which the word Persians is written. There you see the text down there. And then underneath it all, on the lower tier, you've got a Persian tax gatherer counting tribute at this table. And this is interesting, I think, because there are signs for numbers, and they are very large numbers, put it this way, 100, 1,000, 10,000. Signs for Greek currency as well. And the treasurer is brandishing this sort of wax tablet with the considerable sum of 10 talents on it. It's a massive amount of of money. That essentially is what you're looking at there, is the likely outcome should Darius's goals be realized for the Greeks. And the suffering will be far more than just financial, I think, at the end of it. So in that election, they know what's coming, and they elect a very controversial character called Miltiades. Here is his name written in Greek, at a time when they had these elections called ostracisms, a wonderful thing where once a year you can write on a piece of broken pottery the name of the person you most want to leave the state. And they have to go for 10 years if they lose. He won that one, so he was all right, but that's his name. Controversial character, always. His name means the son of the red earth. And they elected him as one of their 10 generals, alongside a man called Callimachus as what they call the Polemarchos, the war leader, which was an equally important choice, I think. And these two men took up the office in the summer of 490, and within a matter of weeks, really, they were taking decisions in a battle that John Stuart Mill actually famously said, as an event in English history, is more important than the Battle of Hastings. I love that. So why is this happening? Maybe something to talk about in questions a bit later, I think, but why the need to fight? In brief, in the year 499, there'd been a revolt by the culturally Greek cities of Asia Minor, modern Turkey if you like, who had long been part of the Persian Empire, and they revolted against their Persian overlords. And Athens and the city of Eretria on the island of Euboea, close by, sent ships to help this rebellion. And during that, the Greeks burned the regional administrative capital at Sardis, and they accidentally torched the temple of the great mother goddess, Kaibibi, or Kubaba, rebuilt in that operation. That was crucial. There. And that essentially, and here is the city of Eretria that sent those ships as well as Athens. But this gave Darius just grievances in his mind, anyway, to subjugate Greece. In fact, he might already have had an invasion in mind, actually. But once he put down this revolt that he was facing, he sent his forces in the year 490 under the command of Datis, who'd been involved in suppressing that revolt, and also Darius' own half-brother Artaphernes. They led a huge armada that was said to be 600 ships strong. Persian armadas are always multiples of 600 ships, really, in the sources. And with them, sailing with them, is Athens' ex-tyrant, Hippias. He'd been expelled he'd been ruler of Athens for a while, but he'd been expelled and he'd gone to live in exile in Darius' court. And after his expulsion, he sort of threw in his lot with the Persians. So this armada kind of island hopped across the Aegean Sea, and they turned their first main assault onto Eretria here. And there's evidence on the site of burning of temples and that kind of thing. It was plundered, the temples were torched in revenge for that attack on Sardis. So, after that, the Persians sail across the sea. They sail across from Eretria to Marathon. This is where they're going. These are the hills beyond, and the battle site just beyond here. So they sail across, and on Hippias' advice, they sail across to Marathon. Marathon means the place of fennel, and it's about 40 kilometres from Athens. So they come over here from Eretria, which is up here, to Marathon, which is a bit further down here. So they come across and sail down there. And it's, for them, I think, it's a very convenient place. They can make an unopposed landing, they can beach their ships, there's excellent terrain there for the formidable Persian cavalry. And they also have proximity to a pro-Hippias, politically aligned area of Athens' territory as well. So it's looking good for them. However, the territory there also holds advantage for the defenders if they can harness them effectively. So that's what it looks like on a map, and that's what it looks like from an aeroplane. If you fly to Athens, you nearly always fly over the Battle of Marathon site, and it's very distinctive with this promontory here, this there. So what are we looking at? Well, you've got the Bay of Marathon. It has this flat, sandy beach. It's about 8 kilometres long. And then inland of that, there's a plain. Again, it's about 8.5 kilometres long, about 2.5 kilometres wide for most of the time. And it's hemmed in by mountains on the inland side, various Greek mountains that are have wonderful names: Agrieliki, Aphorismos, Kotronis, Davronaki, and Draconera, with valleys in between, called Vrana, Avlona, Charadra, and Katosuli. And there's in the middle of it, it's marked there, there's a sort of torrential river, or the bed of a torrential river called the Charadra River, that's more or less in the middle of the plain. But in the summer of 490, it's dry, and it's not really going to create a significant obstacle, but it's a feature of the plain at the time. The coastline, these things change, you know, so it would have been broadly similar to how it is today, but the sea level a little bit lower, about 1 metre or 2 or 3 metres lower, so the plain would have been slightly larger, slightly wider in antiquity, but that's the territory there. And you can see down at the sort of bottom left, there's a sanctuary of Heracles there, between Mount Agrieliki and the sea. And another key area of the battlefield really is this large area of marshland up at the north. And the ground there, we're told, is uneven, and it's muddy, and it's full of lakes, and it's infested with trichorrhithian gnats, we're told, which are particularly bad local gnats in this region at the top there. There's a spring there called Macaria, the Macaria spring, at this place called Trichorrhithos. And there's a river that runs from the lakes that might have been a lagoon, rather. They call them lakes, but it might have been a kind of a lagoon. So you've got a kind of natural harbour there, sort of inland harbour, that can be used as well if it is going to do that. It gives natural access to the sea. And then you've got sort of pine-clad dunes along the beach there, which are part of the whole process of the battlefield. So, and then the northern horn of the bay is formed by this very distinctive peninsula. They call it the Kinosura. Kinosura means dog's tail. So you've got your dog's tail peninsula there. So that's the sort of basic geography of it. Now, kind of our main source for this is Herodotus, who's writing about this, but he leaves the precise location of the Persians' arrival very vague. So does the tragic poet Aeschylus, who fought in the battle, but he proclaimed that the witnesses of his manhood really were the grove at Marathon and the Persians who landed there. That's all we're told. We've got a grove and that's about it. The most likely place for that would be here, that they're going to land in this sort of corner between the beach and the peninsula there. And what they'll do, the Persians, it seems to be the case, is they drew their vessels up stern first on the sand. With others, there's a lot of them, so they'd have to moor some of them out close to the beach perhaps and install some of them in the lagoon. And so they put their vessels are there, and then their bivouacs are probably going to be in these two regions here. So you're going to put them in the Trichorrhithus area where all the gnats are, and some soldiers further down into the plain. They're closer to the Charadra riverbed and between that and the marsh. And again, we haven't got much to go on as to what's going on and where things are, but there was a local tradition that placed the cavalry near to Trichorrithus and the spring up here. A writer called Pausanias, about a good 500 years later, more than that, 600 years later, went tourist travelling really and wrote an account. And he was told by a guide that beyond the lakes are the stone mangers of Artaphernes' horses and the marks of a tent on the rocks. So you could go sightseeing and see this stuff up in that region there. And I think the commanders, Artaphernes and Datis, must have thought that in the unlikely event of the Athenians actually coming and confronting them there at Marathon, they would simply overwhelm them. And but that if they didn't, you know, the Persians would subsequently be able to march on the city, take it by storm, or secure its betrayal by fifth columnists acting on behalf of Hippias. So for them, I think, landing here, it looks like a complete win-win situation. This is perfect. They're ready to go. For their part, the Athenian army had already assembled. They knew they were coming. And they'd assembled in Athens. They were given an instruction, collect provisions and march out. And that's how you sort of gave the order to assemble. And I think this is really important, is that their democratic system is one of the reasons they win, I think. Sorry about the spoiler alert there. But, you know, their society is based, and their system, democratic system, is based on over 100 small localities that they call demes, demoi, which are the basic units of local government. They are hereditary social units. You carry your deme name in your own name. And they've got exceptionally strong and cohesive identities. The demesmen live, you know, very close by one another. They cooperate in local government. They help each other out during the cycles of the agricultural year. They control their own membership. They celebrate communal religious festivals and rituals. Their neighbours, their friends, their relatives, sometimes their lovers. So it's a very close group. And every sort of local magistrate, a guy called the demarch, can consult these deme registers, these lexiarchia grammatea, as they're called. So he can consult those to confirm who is liable for call-up, and which is obviously crucial, but he knows, he's got local knowledge, so he knows who is officially exempt, for instance on the grounds of disability or something like that, and also has a personal knowledge of the men, which allows him very much to assess who are the most effective fighters. And as far as possible, only the best of them are going to march out to war. You know, the weak, the cowardly, the inept are a dangerous liability. Everybody's survival depends on everybody else. So, you know, it's a close-knit group, and they have to maintain that closeness. The demes vary in size, but the average one will contribute probably about 56 hoplite fighters, heavy armed fighters, to the army as a whole. So, and that forms, I think, what in modern military parlance is the primary group. You know, that's, and on the battlefield it's crucial. My colleague Jason Crowley has written great stuff about Athenian hoplites. He's an ex-military man himself, and he says it well. He says that, to quote him, he says, acting in congruence with group norms not only maintains or enhances the soldier's status, but also ensures continued access to physical and psychological support. You know, this is a key element of the Athenians' excellence. They're not professional soldiers. This is a key thing as well. They're not professionals, they're amateur warriors. And yet, their sort of capacity to endure sustained and really quite savage close quarters combat is absolutely exceptional, as we'll see. How many of them went? Well, it's not sure. Numbers are always difficult, I think, in ancient history. But Herodotus, for instance, just says there were only a few of them. It's really not helpful. He implies, though, that all 10 Athenian tribes are present. The Athenians were a tribal society. There were 10 tribes that they were part of, as well as their demes. So they were all there. And if the army was at full strength, which you would expect, that would give a ballpark figure of about 9,000 to 10,000 heavy armed fighters, hoplites. Another historian, Nepos, gives a figure of 9,000, and also adds that the Athenians were outnumbered 10 to 1 by 100,000 Persians. Plutarch and Pausanias, and also a Byzantine source called the Suda lexicon, they all give us about 9,000, and a Roman historian called Justin comes in with 10,000. So it's roughly that figure that go out. But Pausanias adds something that's really quite striking and interesting, and something unique about this army, which he says, when he says this, he says, not more than 9,000 Athenians marched to Marathon, even including those who were technically too old for active service and slaves. That's extraordinary if it's true. Not only, this is not normal, you know, and not only were the slaves fighting alongside their masters, but they would be buried separately and on the battlefield. Battlefield burial was a major honour. You know, it was really special. And Pausanias in his description says that on the plain of Marathon there is another grave, for this was the first battle in which slaves ever fought. So an extraordinary thing. I'm not sure how that, you know, how far we can push that. How many of them we're not told, how they were equipped, whether they were freed first, how they were integrated into the Athenian battle line can only be guesswork, I think. But it's an interesting sort of aspect of the battle, that there's a possibility that there were slaves there fighting alongside masters or ex-masters. Whatever, these guys like to fight hand to hand. That's what it's all about. The use of light armed troops is a light armed troop being seen off by a Persian cavalryman at the time. But light armed troops, they call them psiloi, archers, javelin throwers, that kind of thing. They are not the norm in the Athenian military in 490. And there's something absolutely fundamental about the psychology of this, I think, that these psiloi are not just inferior troops, they are inferior men. There's a Spartan later on who famously quips that the spindle, by which he means the arrow, would be worth a great deal if it could discriminate between brave men and cowards. And of course the spindle is used by women, not men. So it's fighting at a distance is not a manly thing to do. And a similar prejudice applies to cavalry as well. Because you can see these guys haven't got stirrups. And if you haven't got stirrups, it's pretty much impossible to fight very effectively hand to hand. So skirmishing with javelins, like they're equipped there, is the best they can do. Again, it's a soft option. These are elite in society, but not so much in the army. Only the hoplite fights eyeball to eyeball, and only the hoplite is a real man, if you like. And I think that's an important part of the psychology of this as well. Also important, I think, is the fact that there is a wealth qualification for hoplite service. The fighters had to provide their own equipment, and this is expensive. So these real Athenian men are drawn primarily from a relatively affluent economic class who are called the Zeugitai, you know, wealthy enough to have they're the yoke men, to have a yoked pair of oxen in origin. So they have to provide their own kit. And this is what it looks like, essentially. We have lots and lots of information from finds of material and some illustrations and sculptures and so on. So these guys equip themselves with these helmets, these bronze, what they call Corinthian-style helmets, that have, these guys are wearing on their head. There's a couple of casts of them that are in my own collection, but you have these wonderful helmets with sort of almond-shaped eye holes and a sort of vertical slit for the mouth. The nose protector is quite prominent. You see it from, but when you pull it down over your face, it looks like this. So you've got these sort of nose protectors, and there's a sort of projection at the nape of the neck as well. And the helmet is heavy. It's made from one piece of bronze. It's lined with leather or with linen, and it weighs about 3 kilos. So it's a heavy piece of kit. Peripheral vision is bad. Hearing is very difficult. But in close quarters fighting like this, it's a really valuable piece of kit. And you can see as well that the upper body of the hoplite is covered by a sort of bronze corselet, so they call it a thorax. And it's two bronze pieces that are fastened together at the shoulders. And as you can see there, really, it's modelled on and decorated to replicate the, sort of a muscular torso, to make you look more muscular than you are, probably. And it's sort of, you just see it kind of flares out a little bit at the just above the hips, so that helps your mobility. But again, it's heavy and it's hot. But on the other hand, it's highly effective in close quarters, eyeball to eyeball combat. You wear a sort of linen tunic as underwear, and also you can see that they've got bronze greaves as well, shaped to fit the musculature of the wearer's calf and to provide your protection for the shins. So that's your armour. Your prime defensive asset really is your shield here, and these are big, this big, you know, kind of 80 centimetres or so across. They're made of wood or hardened leather, faced with bronze, and sometimes, like this nice one here, they've got sort of insignia on them, you know, family ones or mythological ones. And you hold it like this guy's doing here. There's a sort of strap in the middle that you put your arm through, and then there's another, so almost like a handle on the edge of the shield that you hold to keep it in place there. And again, it's heavy, anything between 8 and 15 kilos. So you know, you're wearing a lot of kit. Wonderful in close quarters combat, but very awkward in more improvised, if you like, individual encounters as well. And there's a curious thing about it, is that it's, the name of it is an aspis, that's what they call it, an aspis. And the way you hold it means that it projects to your left. So I'm relying on the guy over there to protect me on this side. That's the way it works. And that creates a tendency for the formations, because I'm looking to him for support, to move in that direction. So they drift to the right as they advance, if they don't control it properly. So that's that. That's your shield. And actually, contrary to popular belief, the hoplite is not named after his shield. The Greek word hoplon means a tool or an implement. So a hoplite, a hoplites, is someone who is equipped, not tooled up in the military sense, if you like. He's got a tool, but it's not in that military sense. The words that they used probably in 490 were eichnetes, which means a spearman, or a panoplos, which means a totally equipped man. And these guys, you know, sort of go on the attack. Again, use a good illustration of a shield with his arm through it as well, I think, there. So they go on the attack with these spears. They're 2.5 to 3 meters long, thrusting spears. You wield them one-handed. They've usually got an ashwood shaft, iron point at the front, and an iron spike on the butt as well, that they call the sauroter, a lizard slayer, which is cool. So you can ram it into the ground, or you can ram it into a trampled enemy lizard as you're powering past. And you can also use it as a viable weapon in its own right, if your spear shaft gets broken as well. So they use that, and also they very often have an iron sword as well, about that long, 60 centimeters long or so, to complete the kit. So those are the Greek guys who are going into battle. That's how they're equipped, these totally equipped men. And they deploy in what's conventionally called a phalanx, that's a Greek word, fighting shoulder to shoulder and one behind the other, usually in files of 8 men deep. And as far as possible, those files are constituted of fellow demesmen as well. So good order, like you see on the vase here, is absolutely everything. Eutaxia in Greek. Crucial. Disorder, ataxia, is fatal. Aristotle puts it very well. He says, without orderly formation, hoplite soldiers are useless. So you have to be in good formation. And as soon as you see what happens, as soon as you get within striking distance, the front ranks begin a sort of frenzied stabbing with their spears. They're wielded overarm generally. And the finest fighters are not only stationed in the front rank, which they are, which is the most honoured cutting edge, but also at the rear, in the back rank, to act as enforcers, to make sure you've got no combat avoidance in the middle. So your best fighters front and back. And this creates a process of automatic replacement of casualties, because it forces new fighters into the front rank, should someone go down at the front. And the spear thrusting is augmented by a thing that the Greeks called othismos. It means shoving. So the rear ranks physically shove against the backs of the ones in front. So what you get is almost like a sort of hyper-violent rugby scrum or a rolling maul or something like that, except you've got, there's no referee and there's no laws of the game. But that's how they fight. But weirdly, so weirdly, there's a social thing going on here as well. These spearmen did hardly any training, the Athenian ones, which is a class-based attitude. Excessive training equals forced labour. Forced labour equals slavery. So we don't do it. Very interesting. So that's what they're deploying. And when the news of the Persians arrive, when they hear that they've landed, the Athenians have some tough decisions to make. Now, where do they make their stand? Do we do it in the city, behind the safety of the walls, but at risk of betrayal by, from within? Or do we go out to Marathon and confront what is a much larger force, much more mobile, on disadvantageous terrain? That's what their choice is. And our sources mention a thing called the Miltiades Decree, which suggests that General Miltiades persuaded the authorities to take the Marathon option. It was a huge gamble, I think, but at least they went all in on it. And so they march out to Marathon. But they also look for help from other sources. So they send a plea to their nearby neighbours and friends at Plataea, here in Boeotia, asking them to come, and they send out the first of their 2 marathon runners of this. This is a guy called Philippides. We also find him called Pheidippides or Phidippides, who is an incredibly fit specialist day runner, the special people who did this. And he set off for Sparta and experienced what seemed to be a kind of sonic epiphany of the god Pan on the way, before he arrives at Sparta the day after he leaves Athens. It's quite a run, impressive, not unbelievable. If you drive there, it's 215 kilometres. So it's a long one. But he makes it, and actually in 1982, there was a 56-year-old RAF wing commander who ran it in 35 and a half hours. Wow. So, it can be done. And so he gets there as Philippides, and the Spartans say, yeah, we're very happy to help, but we can't come now, because we're celebrating a festival, the Carneia festival of Apollo. It finishes at the full moon, we've got to wait for that, and we don't engage in warfare during that time. We just don't. So Philippides runs back to Athens to deliver the news, and the Spartans wait for the full moon, and the Athenians likewise. So the Athenians now have left the city, so they're on their way. They know that they need to be at Marathon before the Persians can get out of the plain to the south. There are 2 routes that they could choose. There's an easier but longer one up the coast, which is vulnerable to attack from the sea, or they could take a shorter, considerably safer inland one, but it's through quite mountainous terrain. They may have done both. We don't know which they chose. But what we do know is that when rosy-fingered dawn shed her light on the mountains of Marathon the following morning, the Persians would have been absolutely astounded to see an Athenian force at the bottom end of the plain there, covering the exits. So Miltiades and Callimachus have got the initiative now in all of this. And Herodotus says that the Athenians encamped by the sanctuary of Heracles down there. Good place to be. So it covers the southern exits of the plain via both the Vrana Valley that goes up that way and the road that goes down to Athens. So they've kind of shut the bottom end of the plain to the Persians. They've got good water supply, and they're backed as well by the sort of slopes of Mount Agrialiki as well behind them, which is a good vantage point. So this is that mountain that's behind them. Persians off to the left of where that photograph is. So they've got that behind them. And another thing they do is to fell a load of trees to provide more defensive material to get in the way of the Persian cavalry. And they need to play the narrowness of this space to their own advantage. And that's what they're going to seek to do. And they're boosted at this point by the arrival of the Plataeans, who they've asked for. They come with all the resources they have. Maybe anything up to 1,000 hoplites arrive as well from Plataea. So the armies are kind of deployed on the plain now. But what we get is a standoff for several days. There's no immediate rush to fight, actually, because the Persians want to fight on the plain, obviously, where their assets can be deployed to the maximum effect. And there's always a possibility that Athens might be betrayed anyway if they delay. From the Greek side, they can afford to stay there, watching the Persians, watching their routines, covering the roads back to Athens, and waiting for the Spartans, who are not going to be that long now. So there's a bit of a standoff. But even so, in that, we hear that the Greek high command is split. The way they worked was this: they've got 10 generals, and they decide strategy by majority vote. They're all good Democrats, so they work. But they're split. 5 of them want caution, and the other 5, including Miltiades, want to engage. So we get to the point where, to break the deadlock, Miltiades decides he's going to consult Callimachus, the Polemarchos, who has this crucial casting vote. He's the go-to man. And Herodotus reproduces a speech that he makes. So Miltiades goes to Callimachus and says this. He says, Callimachus, you've got a choice. You can enslave Athens or liberate her. If the Athenians submit to the Persians, their fate is sealed. It'll be back to the days of Hippias. But if the city's saved, it will become the greatest in Greece. And it's all down to you. Look, the generals are split 50-50, but if we hold back, the chances are that we'll become even more divided and eventually make friends with the Persians. We need to fight and win before that happens. If you support me in the debate, you will liberate Athens and make it the greatest state in Greece. If you don't, the opposite will happen. And so, faced with this amazing emotive appeal to fame and freedom, Callimachus cast his vote for Miltiades. They're going to engage. Again, that's where they're looking at. Persians over in the distance, Greeks here with their backs to the mountains. The Athenians still wait, though, for Miltiades' designated day of leadership to come round. So they're waiting a little while longer. But coincidentally, on that day, probably on or around the 12th of September, 490, a good opportunity to attack emerged. Callimachus, he's the Polemarchos, he has the place of honour on the right wing. Next to him are other tribes, of the Athenian tribes. They have a sort of standard order of deployment. And then the Plataeans are on the left wing. Miltiades' tribe, he's of the Oines tribe. He's going to be pretty much in the middle, which is probably crucial. But they've got a problem, because at 8 men deep, as they'd like to fight, their line will stretch about 1 metre per man, will stretch around 1,250 metres. they need 300 meters more to completely block the plain. So what they do is that they thin the center of their line, but keep the wings at full strength. So they're slightly weaker in the middle. And it becomes a problem now as you try to sort of recreate what happens next, because none of the ancient sources at all tell us the starting positions of the two armies. So there's loads of speculation about where they could be. You know, logically, the Athenians and Plataeans are going to want to fight on the narrowest front possible to negate the Persian cavalry and mobility and not be outflanked. And the plain has a number of ways that you could do that. So we could do it here, so Greeks red, Persians blue. We could do it between Mount Stavrakaki and the sea, close to the Great Marsh. That could be there, Persians with their backs to the marsh. It might happen further down in the plain, sort of either side of the Kharadra torrent riverbed. Could happen on a different sort of orientation, with the Greeks parallel to the coast in the foothills of Mount Kotroni, there on the left-hand side, and the Persians with their backs to the sea there. It could happen there, perhaps, at the entrance to the Vrana Valley, where you could shut that off, again with the Persians with their backs to the sea. Or it could happen there, if you like, with the Greeks up against Mount Agrialiki, covering the valley and the road to Athens, and the Persians further down on the Greek side of the Kharadra riverbed. Or it could happen again at the entrance to the plain there on the road to Athens. And there are, to be honest, there are nuanced versions of all of those theories, and lots of valid arguments that one could make, both for and against them. I think in the end, all you can say, there's one or two things that you can use later about where the tombs are and where the trophy is. But fundamentally, all you can really say with any confidence is that it was fought out on the plain somewhere, I think, really. So, the Greeks are going to attack though, and sacrifices are made and the omens are good. And Miltiades says, right, engage. And they make for the Persians, in a Greek word, dromor. It means at a run, at a jog, at the double, in quick step. It's a difficult word to translate, really difficult. But they need to get there fast and in good order. The Persian tactics of choice are to use their cavalry to shower enemy infantry formations with missiles, to keep wheeling around, regrouping and repeating. The infantry perform what they call sparabara. It comes from the Persian word spara, which means a shield. So what they will do is to create a palisade of wicker shields in front of their front rank and simply unleash endless volleys of arrow fire from behind it until the enemy formations disintegrate. And only then, against a beaten and disorganized army, will they choose to engage hand-to-hand. So that's what they're trying to achieve on their part. So, the Greeks have to move very fast against the Persians, who are, fine characters. Herodotus says that the distance between the two battle lines at the start is about 1,425 meters. And for the final, roughly 175 meters, the Greeks are going to have to run through salvo after salvo of Persian arrow fire. So that's their challenge. From the Persian point of view, they're not expecting this. This is totally un-Persian. They say later on that they thought it was lethal insanity to do it. They were just mad thing to do. Particularly in the absence of supporting archers and horsemen, which they haven't got. But it could be, at this point, that the Greeks had spotted that the Persians themselves were without cavalry and had taken that opportunity to attack. So there is a Byzantine source called the Suda Lexicon that has an entry in it, and the entry says, the cavalry are away. And in that entry it says, they say that after Datis had gone away, the Ionians climbed into the trees and signalled to the Athenians that the cavalry were away, and that when Miltiades learned of their absence, he charged. So interesting. Now, this could be Ionian alternative facts, all right, to soften the fact that the Ionians, who are Greeks, are fighting for Persia against their fellow Greeks. So they might just be trying to get themselves off the hook here. But Herodotus doesn't make any mention of cavalry on the Persian side in his description of the battle. So there's a lot of scholarly dispute about this. Some of them reject the idea. Others wonder whether the horses are being watered at some point at the Macaria spring there, or that they're still in there being pastured up by the Great Marsh and they just show up too late for the occasion. Others suggest that possibly they're being disembarked onto the Persian fleet at this point in order to make a dash to Athens around the Greek forces, and that's why they're not there to go and attack either the Greek forces from the rear or Athens itself. Again, we don't know, but there's this interesting possibility of they spotted that there was an opportunity to go in. And when Herodotus finally describes the battle, the main action, it takes him less than 150 words in Greek. It's really short. It comes out as 188 in my translation. And this is how he says it. The Athenians engaged all together with the barbarians and fought in a way that's worthy of the highest praise. Firstly, they were the first Greeks that we know of who used running at the enemy as a tactic. And secondly, they were the first to endure the sight of Median clothing and the men who wore it. Median, the Greeks often call the Persians the Medes, because the Medes and the Persians are similar. So he says that, sorry, so they're the first to endure the sight of Median clothing. Prior to that, he says, the Greeks were terrified simply to hear the name of the Medes. And he says they fought for a long time at Marathon, for a long time. Interesting detail. The barbarians were dominant in the centre. That is where the Persians themselves and the Sakai were deployed. The Sakai come from kind of Afghanistan area in the Persian Empire. There, the barbarians got the upper hand, smashed through the Greek line, and began to pursue them inland. However, the Athenians and Plataeans were triumphant on both wings, and once they'd broken through, they allowed the routed barbarians to flee and brought the wings together to engage those who had smashed the centre of their line. And the Athenians were victorious. They followed the fleeing Persians, smiting them as they went, until they got to the sea, where they called for fire and began to seize the ships. That's the description that we have. Only description. So the Athenians capture 7 Persian ships. And Herodotus' account is lovely, actually. It's, it references moments in Homer's Iliad. Smiting is epic. It's an epic word, unusual word. And among the high-profile Greek casualties is Aeschylus's brother, Kynagirus, who dies, we're told, when his hand is smitten off with an axe as he grabs a ship's carved stern post, which is another weird word, actually, that goes back to Homer. And the historian Justin says that even after his right hand was cut off, he grabbed the ship with his left, and when that was cut off, he sank his teeth into the timbers of the vessel and carried on fighting like a wild beast. And it may be an illustration here. 30 years after the battle, there was they could have gone to see a painting, the painted Stoa in Athens, which Pliny the Elder saw, Pausanias saw it as well, Pliny the Elder, the guy who died in the Vesuvius eruption. Which he says this: the Plataeans and men from all over Attica are coming to grips with the barbarians. Things are about equal. But in the heart of the battle, the barbarians are in flight, pushing each other into the marsh. And the painting ends with the Phoenician ships and with the Greeks slaughtering barbarians as they jump into them. In the picture of the fighting, you can most clearly make out Callimachus, who was chosen to be chief Athenian general, and General Miltiades. So this became a subject of art. And this is a 2nd century AD sarcophagus. It's in Brescia now. thought to depict the fighting there. So you've got the nude ones of the Athenians, heroically nude, pursuing barbarically dressed Persians back to the ships and slaughtering them on the beach. You've got in the background, you can see sort of Phoenician triremes with their carved stern posts here pulled up on the beach, and all sorts of interesting bits of fighting there. You've got, I like the sort of shieldless Athenian who's grabbing the Persian as he goes there in the action there to unseat him from his horse, and all sorts of sort of violent acts. But you've got one down in the bottom left-hand corner. You've got a great sort of Persian down here, sort of biting the leg of a Greek warrior down there, and there's a barbarian over here wielding an axe, which might be a reference to Aeschylus's brother there, who's hanging on to one of those stern posts. So, you know, you get good art doing this, and certainly, you know, a lot of the high-profile Athenians, you know, were killed in action by the ships. Callimachus was himself. His memorial is now in the Acropolis Museum in Athens, restored there with bits of text, a bit fragmentary, but Callimachus of the Deme of Aphidnae dedicated me to Athena, the messenger of the immortal gods, that's victory, who dwell in their Olympian homes. Callimachus, polemarch of the Athenians, who fought the battle of Marathon for the Greeks, to the sons of the Athenians a memorial, and then missing letters. Plutarch describes Callimachus being transfixed by so many spears that he remained standing upright even though he was dead. But he got this wondrous monument that's still there. So in a way, our big picture of the battle is clear enough, but the questions of detail are tricky, I think. But there are some local traditions that Pausanias recorded that are useful. He says this, he says, the grave on the plain is that of the Athenians. On it there are stelae, sort of markers like this is one of them, which have the names of the dead listed according to their tribes. And as I say, this is one of them. It's in a local archaeological museum at Astros, with a moving list of the Athenians. You know, its inscription says, "Fame, which always reaches the ends of the bright earth, will speak of the valor of these men and how they died, fighting against the Medes and bringing a crown of glory to Athens, few as they were, facing many in battle." And then there's a list, 22 real names. You know, very moving monument, I think, there. And the grave that Pausanias talks about is this thing called the Soros, about 12 metres high, 50 metres across, biggest monument on the plain still, which is the burial site of the Athenians, pretty much. It's accepted as being that, possibly where the thick of the fighting took place. So it has these grave markers and various pieces of quite basic grave goods, but with, you know, illustrations here again of people fighting and goddesses intervening, and so on. So these grave goods are buried with the heroes of Marathon and this particular grave. And there's lots of graves. Pausanias says there was another grave for the Plataeans, the Boeotians, for the slaves. And that's been used to try to, you know, to make out where the Plataeans were stationed on the battlefield as well. Are the graves where the main fighting was, or where they lined up to start with? And he took this walk through the plain, from south to north, and was shown a private memorial to Miltiades that was put up years after the battle. We've lost the location of that, but he heard a spooky tale about it, which is great. He says, "Here, every night you can hear the noise of whinnying horses and of men fighting. It's never done any man good to wait there and observe this closely." It's good. You know, maybe just a local ghost story for a gullible tourist, or maybe, you know, could we bring that into discussions about where the Persian cavalry were or were not interesting. And the supernatural comes in quite a lot. There's a spectral appearance of Theseus happens in the battle as well. So he's their great Athenian hero, fully armed, rushing ahead against the barbarians. And the painting has him rising out of the earth. And we have a fantastic story about another hero that the people of Marathon themselves worship, a character called Eketlaos, who is the ploughshare handle man, who sort of appears out of nowhere with a country look and country equipment and kills loads of barbarians with a ploughshare. And the Athenians say, well, who was he? And the oracle simply says, pay honours to the hero Eketlaos, which is great. And another unworldly one involves a guy with either the name of Polyzelus or Epizelus, which has generated quite a lot of recent interest. We're told that he had a supernatural vision, lost his sight, and became blind. And Herodotus calls him Epizelus. Fighting heroically, again, he goes blind, even though he had no physical injury, and he never got his eyesight back. And he thought it happened when a sort of huge sort of image of a hoplite confronted him and put his shadow over his shield and killed the man next to him. And a lot of discussions these days about whether this is the first instance of shell shock, post-traumatic stress disorder. When you actually look at the symptoms of PTSD, it doesn't match up. But it's been interesting as a discussion here of how it is. Can we bring that into experiences of the battle that as we have it? So that's an interesting aspect of that. And also another monument that we hear is a trophy as well, a trophy made of white marble. So it's up the battlefield near the marsh, and fragments of it are in the Marathon Museum here. Trophy is an interesting thing. It means the turning point. Tropes, a tropion, is a turning point monument. Where the battle turns is where you erect your trophy. So could it be that the battle turned or something significant happened at that end there by the Great Marsh? Interesting, I think. So it could be that there was significant action happening up at that end of the battlefield as well as down the south by the graves. There's no sort of Persian grave markers. They were probably just chucked in the marsh. But the numbers are recorded. So 6,400 Persians die, and 192 on the Athenian side is the figures that we're given. How reliable, hard to tell, I think, but that's the figures that we have. So it's not the end of the process, because after the battlefield, the Persians try and sail round now to Athens, while the Athenians make a dash for it by land. So the Persians are still going to have another go to get to Athens. It's hard to know what time of day it was now, because again we're not helped out by the sources very much. But there's this dash for Athens, the Athenians by land, the Persians by sea, and it's one of those who makes the run, who sort of immortalises himself running back as the second of the great marathon runners. This guy's called Eucles. And Herodotus says, most historians say it was Eucles who, still hot from battle, ran in full kit, burst through the Archon's doors and could only say, "Rejoice, we won." And then he immediately breathed his last. So, but they made it. In the meantime, the rest of the Athenians got back before the Persians, and at that point, stymied in their intentions, the Persians called off the invasion and set sail for home. So the blood's drying on the battlefield. The Spartans show up kind of a couple of days late, do some sightseeing and go home again. The full moon has happened. Miltiades and the marathon fighters are lauded to the skies. And there's this wonderful hoplite helmet at Olympia, which has Miltiades' name inscribed on it, possibly from the battle. So there as a dedication for the marathon victory. The Athenians build this wonderful treasury at Delphi to commemorate the battle. They say it was dedicated to Apollo as first fruits from the meads at the Battle of Marathon. They built a colossal statue to Athena and put it on the Acropolis that you can see right out from Cape Sunion. And it's been suggested that the equestrian figures on the Parthenon frieze there, you can make them number 192 if you're creative about it, that they represent the heroized dead of the battle as well. Aeschylus wrote great art about it himself as well. He wrote his own epitaph. This tomb in grain bearing Gela in Sicily, where he died, covers Aeschylus, the son of Euphorion, an Athenian who died here. The famous grove of Marathon could tell of his prowess, and the mead with his thick long hair knew it all too well. The great epitaph, we love it. And of course, you know, Marathon. End of the 19th century, you see the first staging of the Olympic Games in Athens in 1896, and perhaps the greatest cultural legacy of it in many ways, in the marathon race. It's the concept was suggested to Baron Pierre de Coubertin, who founded the Olympic movement, by a Frenchman named Michel Bréal. He suggested a race from Marathon to the Pnyx, which would have an antique flavour, and they could give a cup as well. If only we knew how long it took him to the Greek to run, we could have a record as well. But Coubertin loved the idea, and so they ran the first marathon race in 1896. To the newly built stadium in Athens there, and as it unfolded, it was great. The news came that this guy, Spiridon Lewis, is this Greek farmer, and he's running in the full Fustanella kit. He runs 40 kilometres in a full Fustanella, allegedly. That he's winning, and the Greeks all start shouting, "Hellene, Hellene," you know, Greek, Greek. When he arrives in the stadium, there's paroxysms of delight, cannon fire, and everything, and wonderful nationalistic pride that comes with this. That's a big part of it. So, and that's a big thing. I think going back to John Stuart Mill and all that kind of thing. You know, is this a great national thing? Is it a great East-West thing? Yeah, hard to tell. Are we being too Western about it? I'm not sure. But it's interesting. I think it's an interesting thing to ponder about, the what-ifs, the counterfactual stuff. And I rather like, as a sort of finishing thing, Robert Graves's poem, great poem. It's called The Persian Version, which is great. We see it from Herodotus all the time. But he wrote this between 1938 and 1945, looking at the Battle of Marathon from a rather different perspective. I rather like it. It says, goes like this. Truth-loving Persians do not dwell upon the trivial skirmish fought near Marathon. As for the Greek theatrical tradition, which represents that summer's expedition not as a mere reconnaissance in force by 3 brigades of foot and 1 of horse, their left flank covered by some obsolete light craft detached from the main Persian fleet, but as a grandiose, ill-starred attempt to conquer Greece, they treat it with contempt, and only incidentally refute major Greek claims by stressing what repute the Persian monarch and the Persian nation won by this salutary demonstration. Despite a strong defence and adverse weather, all arms combined magnificently together. And that's it. And I thank you for listening. Questions? Yes.
I'm interested in your discussion about the slaves and their relationship with the hoi polloi, so to speak. Now tell me a little bit more about how you would deploy these slaves within the battlefield lineup.
This is
the heroes at the front and the heroes at the back. How do you hide
it's a really difficult thing, I think, and a remarkable thing, because so Herodotus, as I say, just gives you that nugget of information. First time slaves of the fort. What he doesn't say is really anything about what kit, what deployment, what status, because so who provides the kit? Do they serve as hoplites. The masters provide them with the kit. You know, because a lot of this, you know, the equipment they use is almost kind of handed down generation to generation as well. You know, it's, you know, you use granddad's armour, you know, so you know, are they being deployed as light arm troops? But we're just not told. You know, how are they integrated? You know, if they are equipped, or whether they just sort of push them in as weighted numbers into the formation. It's an odd one. It's a really odd anomaly there, because they wouldn't, you know, generally speaking. The whole point about this is that military service in the Greek world at that time goes with political power as well. If you know, those who fight dictate politics, really, which is going to change in Greece when they build a fleet, and all you need to do is to show up and row, and it becomes the most important arm. So all of a sudden, hoi polloi become more important than the hoplites in a way. But the slave issue is a really odd anomaly, because you would not, that would not normally be the case, and I think in the ancient account it's simply just dropped in there. You know, he just drops it in the pool and lets the ripples go. Yeah. So, you know, it would be really nice to know, are they provided with some kind of equipment and integrated into the phalanx formations? Who do they fight with? You know, do they fight with
They must be
deemed
identifiable, because otherwise you chuck them in the same grave as the hero.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really interesting that they have as I said before, battlefield burial is special. You know, normally you take casualties back to the city and have, you know, civic burials back at home, but to be buried on the battlefield is a mark of really high status and achievement. So I found it a remarkable thing, really, that, you know, and he just calls them the slaves, so we don't know where these come, you know, what kind of slaves are they, where have they come from. What we do know is that at that point, the Athenians don't keep Athenians as slaves, but they might keep other Greeks as slaves. So they may be Greeks, they may be, you know, other people from the region, Thracians and so on. They may be, you know, indeed people been conquered in various other wars and bought and sold from dealers and stuff. So, you know, I'm sort of as perplexed as you are by that, to be honest. I think it's an extraordinary thing. Yeah. So you are we still on? Yeah. I did see you. Yeah.
Right. Just an amusing observation from your book, where you said the Greeks, before they went to battle, said that they would sacrifice goats for those who died in battle.
Yes.
And afterwards, they managed to sacrifice their goats very quickly, suggesting your figure of less than 200 is probably fairly accurate.
Yes.
That was my observation, which I thought was really interesting. That kind of non-descriptive history actually confirms a major part of history.
That's right, yeah.
But my question, which is a little bit more broad, who were the Persians? They're called the Medes or the Persians. They subsumed the Assyrians 150 years earlier. They've got guys coming from Afghanistan, they've got guys from Anatolia. Yeah. What was it to be Persian? Were these separate lords that had fealty to Darius, or were they homogenous?
Yeah, it's a great point about the Persian Empire itself. Who were the Persians, basically? Which the Greeks, interesting, the Greeks don't call them the Persians, they call them the Medes. Because they can, you know, the Medes and the Persians are similar, but not the same. You know, from, you know, essentially based in the heartlands of what's now Iran. So that's interesting. The Greeks almost can't tell these people apart. And the Persian Empire is, as I say, is vast. So it goes, it's all the way from the Danube River to India. Right? I say Afghanistan. It covers, you know, they're ruling Egypt. and everything in between, and all the peoples in between. So there's this vast array of people. The only ones we have name checked at Marathon are the Medes, the barbarians often, the Sakai, who are people from Bactria, which is way over northeast, and the Ionians.
And why are the Ionians fighting?
So the Ionians are part of the Persian Empire and have been so for a long time. And as I say, they have this rebellion against their overlords that sort of provides an excuse for Darius to invade Greece in the first place. But they've been there on the coast of, Greeks have been on the coast of what's now Turkey for, a good 500-600 years before this battle happens. In important, thriving, prosperous cities, inventing philosophy and doing all the rest of it. But they've come under Persian control and don't like it very much. But like everywhere else in the Persian Empire, they get essentially conscripted into the Persian army. We get later in the next invasion, so the Persians are not going to let this go at Marathon. So Darius' father Xerxes comes back with a much bigger one, and in that Herodotus catalogues there's a kind of over 5 million men that he brings, giving you a humongous great catalogue, like epic poetry. It's like epic poetry. They love a catalogue. Nothing like that.
Of all the different nations.
All the different nations, all their different kit. He doesn't do it here, which is interesting because it's a smaller, 600 ships worth of guys. But the Persian Empire is this great conglomeration of nations and ethnicities, all under the control of the great king of kings, king of many peoples. It's divided into administrative units that are called satrapies, ruled by satraps who are incredibly powerful, and they have a certain amount of autonomy. They owe Darius their position, so they collect tribute, send it to him, and he supports them. So it's bound together in those kind of ways. It's administratively very slick. They've got great road communications. They've got they're sort of, if you like, their taxation and administration is great. They're religiously tolerant. They don't impose religion on anyone. Darius is supported by Ahura Mazda, their great god, but there is no sort of will to impose that on others. So he will, it will burn Greek temples, but that's not because we don't like Greek gods.
Is there a link to Zoroastrianism in Persian?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So it's a huge. I mean, the Persian Empire is this vast, multicultural, multi-ethnic thing that's sort of focused on the figure of Darius himself and his family. As I say, the navy is probably again Ionians, Greeks, and Phoenicians. So again, we have Phoenician galleys in that. So they're conscripting people according to their specialism.
Yes, that's good.
If you like. So, and as I say, but that's the only ones we hear of here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
When you talked about the battle, you said the Persians got in the centre,
Yeah.
and the Greeks got in the flank.
Yeah.
But if the Persians are outnumbering the Greeks that much, a breakthrough in the centre would normally be terminal for your cause.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's which raises a lot. I mean, absolutely, it raises a lot of questions. Is that, as I say, Herodotus is quite glib about it. They smash the centre, he seems to imply in his account anyway that the encircling that the Greeks perform, when they lose their centre but they push forward on the wings, is that it happens very quickly. Is that the Persians run whoever's in front of them runs, but they don't pursue instantly and just turn in on what's going on. So, it's interesting. It is an interesting thing. As
They've
I
got
say,
cavalry as well.
and they've got unless the cavalry are away. That's
Right.
other aspect of it, which may be the case because they don't get mentioned. But absolutely, it is a strange one, isn't it? Really, that you've got this this sort of thinning of the line. So, how. I guess it's going to take. Would you say it's going to depend on the timing of what happens crucially? Is that the way Herodotus describes it is he describes the Persian breakthrough first, and then the Greek encircling. But if the Greek encircling happened quicker than the Persian breakthrough, there might be more resistance in the centre to enable that to happen. Does that make sense?
Does.
Yeah.
Have we got much Greek cavalry? Do we know?
No. That's the point. They're not taking cavalry. As I say, the Persians just think, you guys are mad. You've got no cavalry. You've got no light troops. Your assault on us is a great phrase. Lethal insanity.
Pushing forward, which would be very vulnerable to
Absolutely.
cavalry charge.
Absolutely, it would. So maybe that's a good argument for cavalry not being available.
There at the time.
And as I say, the Persian use of cavalry, as they use in subsequent battles against the Greeks, is that they use them simply to go as close as possible in safety and use javelins and arrows in order to break up those sort of organised infantry formations. So you don't use them as shock troops.
Right.
Again, because you got no stirrups. So it's hard to fight like that. So essentially you fight as highly mobile skirmishers and light armed troops. So the Persian preference is that we just want to there's got a missile onslaught until you can't take it anymore, and at that point we're in. Then we're on the front foot. But on this occasion, I think it just happens too fast for them, in a sense. Does that make sense? I think
it does.
It's kind of, it is hard to visualise.
Yeah.
I think.
It sounds, Steve, quite similar to Cannae to me.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, obviously with the Romans playing the part of the Persians, and they're breaking through the centre of the Carthaginian front,
Absolutely.
and then the wings close behind.
Yeah.
You're right; it's all a question of timing. I mean, if you allow that breakthrough and you haven't got behind them, or you haven't corralled them at the same time, then you've basically got two wings that are broken. So it has to be almost perfect. And it sounds to me, I mean, we don't know, do we? Because the sources don't tell us, but it sounds to me as if this happens almost more by accident. They've deliberately thinned out the centre because they need to cover the whole of the plain, as you've explained. And those strong wings are the wings that are really going to do the destruction.
Yes, I mean, it doesn't come across, at least in the accounts that were given, as a managed withdrawal.
Yeah.
The Persians break through, and somehow they've got to make their line long enough to fill whatever space they have. So they've got to thin it out, and they choose the centre. They didn't have to. I guess they could have thinned the wings. I guess.
Yeah.
But that's what brings them in together. So yeah, absolutely. And it must happen very quickly, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, Herodotus does say they fought for a long time, and there's some accounts suggest that the fighting was still going on sort of early evening, but it could equally have happened early in the morning as well. But my own gut feeling is that this is something that happens really quite quickly. I don't know how long it takes to run, or to jog in hoplite kit for a mile or so. But minutes, not hours. You know, yeah.
How do you tell them what to do? You tell them they can't hear anything. They don't tell me
They signal with trumpets and with and flutes. You need high-pitched. So let me go back to my high-pitched instruments are audible. Low-pitched ones aren't. Sorry, it's right at the beginning. Yeah. It's doing it all on its own now. But it just, no, I was going to just say that in that phalanx picture, there is a guy playing a flute.
Yeah.
And they march in time. It's interesting, I think, because as I said, the likes of the Athenians and most Greek states, they're not professional warriors. They don't train, really. You know, they just show up and fight. Spartans, on the other hand, train like heck. And one of the things that is said about the Spartans is that they are very, very rhythmic in their way of doing it, and they do things a lot of the time very slowly and deliberately to the music of flutes. And Spartan warriors practice dancing and that kind of thing to give them this close order, you know, perfect formation that they can, where they can advance in the right kind of way. So it's, yeah, with all of this, you need high-pitched things. You sort of, if you like banging drums and things, no good. You need high-pitched instruments to cut through the noise. And that's what they use. Yeah, good.
You mentioned John Stuart Mill. I just wondered when the Battle of Marathon first seeped into British education, when did it first start being taught? And was it taught in a way that the consequences, the civilizational consequences, were more important than the detail of the battle?
Yeah, I think it was. I think it's around that time, I think, that it starts really to take hold. You know, you get a Mill, you get Grote's History of Greece and those kind of things. But it's, so yeah, I'd be, you know, kind of 18th century-ish. And certainly in its early iterations, it becomes this big east-west civilization, barbarity, you know, trope, if you like, as to what it was, to that. And there was a lot of that kind of writing, I think, about those kind of aspects of it. That's how it was read, I think, as a, you know, in many ways as a big what if, a big counter, you know, what's the counterfactual corollary of it? If the Greeks lose, what happens? And I think there was a lot of awareness, particularly of that, as well as that the Greek democracy was a new thing at that time. So the Greeks only went. They'd been working on democracy for 100 years, but they'd only put it in place in about 510. So 20 years before the battle. You know, it was fully established as a fully working system. So it's only a generation old. And the Persians are coming in with the ex-tyrant, with the unconstitutional ruler of Athens. He's there. If they win, he becomes the ruler. He becomes satrap of Greece. You know, in that sense, you know. So I think there was this feeling that grew, particularly around that time, that, you know, if you like, the whole future of democracy is at stake. So I think it's what Mill was saying. You know, interesting that he uses English history, being a Scotsman. You know, but more important than the Battle of Hastings. It was really, I mean, it's an extraordinary thing to say in many ways, but that idea that had the had the Persian Empire emerged dominant at that point, then would the conquest of Greece have happened, and then everything, would have been very different history, if you like. Yeah, fascinating thing. Yay.
Thank you. I mean, continuing that discussion, would you not say that essentially Mill, because the franchise was starting to be expanded during his lifetime, and Britain was moving towards becoming a democracy of sorts, so you saw the parallels with Athens, whereas earlier generations, I think, of political theorists would have seen Athenian democracy very much as something that had gone very badly wrong in the closing stages of the Peloponnesian War, and they would take Athens as essentially they would see Athenian democracy as having become just mob rule, and see it as something to be warned against. And of course, plenty of Greek theorists like Plato and Aristotle were explicitly anti-democratic.
Yeah, I mean, good point. Essentially, good points to make. And it's one of the things that's been interesting about, I think, the reception of this and the, if you like, the Persian Wars more widely, is the role of the Athenians, also the role of the Spartans. It depends who do we admire here. Do we admire the Spartans, or do we admire the Athenians, or who do we not admire on the other point? And yeah, I think the point is well made, is that not everybody in the ancient world is a champion of democracy, that's for sure. Plato didn't like it that much. And Thucydides, I think, when he writes about the Peloponnesian War, writes, with the angle that he really doesn't like the way democracy operates very often, and sees it as a kind of a mob rule, I think.
At this point, presumably, Athenian democracy would essentially have been hoplite democracy. The people below the hoplite class wouldn't have really had a vote, or
they have a vote.
Oh, right.
Yeah, they do have a vote.
Oh, right.
The point is now is that they've removed wealth qualifications from everything. But having a vote, I mean, essentially, they can, in theory, you could propose motions in the assembly and everything else. In reality, that's not going to happen. In reality, it's still, particularly at this time, largely dominated by old aristocratic families who've always been quite dominant. Miltiades is not a man of the people, in a sense. None of them are. So in practice, the Athenians can, at this point, they can really vote on pretty much everything. In some ways, they have a whole load more power than any of us have in a modern democracy. And it's much more hands-on. But on the other hand, the leaders are still coming from, old aristocratic families. As the process went, they removed aristocratic exclusivity from it. So ultimately, Themistocles will come in from a very different background, I think, in that respect. But by and large, and for someone like Hippias of his aristocratic family, for him, as an aristocrat, his people are not hoi polloi. They're other aristocrats. So his loyalty is much more to them and them to him, perhaps. So yeah, it is. As I say, democracy it's still finding its way at this point, and it will have other successors in the next Persian invasion, and then will become much more radical, much more self-confident, I think. But I think it's a big moment for it, I think, is that the Athenians had shown that they could stand on their own 2 feet as a democratic state, and to resist barbarian outsiders, I think. Yeah.
Steve, one last question from George, and then
Yeah, George,
then
please.
we'll break.
I can just about understand and accept that the 10,000 men lost to 100,000 by the sort of example of Cannae and so on. But what happened to the Persian horse? Their famous Persian horse that was so fast and so strong. What happened with them? Where do they go?
Yeah, well, they go missing in action, I think, in a sense. It's as I say, one of the possibilities that happens in the battle is that the Athenians somehow get word that the Persian cavalry, the Persian horse, which is formidable, it's wonderful. They have, exceptionally good cavalry. Is that they are, whatever it is, they're not available to the Persians at that moment when the Athenians choose to attack. Possibly because they're either being watered too far away, or that they're possibly embarking them on the ships in order to take them round to the rear of the Greek position. But we don't know about that. But all we see is that they are, in many ways, extraordinarily missing from this.
They must have been sent on another mission.
Yeah, and another mission would perhaps be an outflanking thing to go round the back of the Athenian position, because when the Persians come again, so 10 years later they're coming back, and they come back with formidable cavalry, really formidable cavalry, and the Greeks seek to negate that by fighting at Thermopylae in a very, very narrow space. But in the final battle at Plataea, it's on much more open space, and the Persian cavalry has the facility to attack and to deploy itself in ways that are much more effective and much more much more sort of concomitant with the way that they would like to fight. So yeah, I think your question is, again, a totally valid and an important one, I think. Where was this cavalry? Because we've specifically chosen to go to Marathon to use it, So why not? Is it that they were just taken, that the Greek charge happened so quickly that there was no time to respond? We don't, our problem is that nobody's telling us.
Okay, we'll stop there. Thanks so much, Steve. That's great.